Y'all ready for your history?
Get started.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite, thanks to RØDE microphones.
These guys are professional. They're motivated.
Introducing Robert Marshall from Source Elements and Someone Audio Post, Chicago. Darren Robbo Robertson from Voodoo Radio Imaging, Sydney. Tech to the VO stars, George the Tech Whittam from LA. And me, Andrew Peters, voiceover talent and home studio guy.
Line up, ladies!
Here we go.
Welcome to another Pro Audio Suite. This week we're looking at some other part of your kit that we don't really pay that much attention to, really. We're all sort of mic savvy. But what about the preamp? So what we put together is a bunch of my preamps just to see how they do colour the sound of your setup. So Robbo, you're on the tools with the green button.
I'm the panel operator.
Where are we going to start?
Let's start here. This is all four of the pre's with your OC18 going through it, and I have normalized all these files to minus 25 LUFS.
The preamp I'm on right now is a Universal Audio LA610. And this preamp is the Grace Design M101, once again with the OC18. With the same microphone, this is the Neve 1073 DPA. As an example of a USB interface, this is once again the Austrian Audio OC18, this time going through the RØDE AI1.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So, well, clearly the AI1 is the darkest.
The Neve surprised me as well, how dark that was.
The Neve is dark, but it's not as dark as the AI1. The Grace had definitely a little bit more cut. I couldn't really tell noise. It was hard to see that one. But the Neve was probably... It was definitely darker, maybe smoother. I can see how the word is warmer. The Grace was, I think, more clear.
Is there any chance that the M1, the Grace had its 80 hertz high pass filter button pressed in?
Oops.
It really sounded
Yes,
like it to me.
Yes, well picked.
There you go. And
It did have the high-pass filter. Yes.
It lacked that bottom octave.
Yeah.
So it that even kind of makes it sound artificially clearer, if you want to say it that way. Because when you scoop out the low end, it kind of tilts it to the high end. But it still has that clarity. And that's by design, right? I mean, these preamps were designed in different decades. Well, actually, the 610 and the 1073, were they both in the 60s? Or?
Yeah.
I don't know if the 610 had any high-pass filter on it. Did it, Andrew?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
Doesn't have one, actually.
And the AI1 certainly doesn't. I mean, the AI1 had quite a bit of depth to it, like quite a bit of low end.
Mm-hmm. Had a lot of low end, yeah.
But the interesting thing is what I've found, because the Grace is probably the most transparent, well, it certainly doesn't have huge amounts of colour at all, if any.
Right.
It actually allowed you to hear what the OC18 really sounded like. That was the interesting thing for me.
Well, if you really listen to it, what it sounds like without a preamp, you won't hear much.
Correct.
Well, Grace, what they're trying to do, my understanding is they are trying to get as transparent as really realistically possible.
Like a wire with gain.
Yeah. And so if you really want to hear what a mic sounds like on a voice, that might be a preamp that you might use. That or something of that same design concept, like the Millennia, we also know as being, clinically clean, so.
The Hardys. The preamp I want to try is a Gordon.
Oh,
I don't know if have you heard of these? It's interesting because most preamps work by having a op amp that has full feedback, and then when you ask for more gain, you're just attenuating less. But really, all these preamps are working like full blast, and then you attenuate down. The Gordon basically has a system where it's real gain instead of having this infinite feedback loop on one of the chips to create the gain, which is about as technical as I can get with it. But it does seem to be the sweetheart preamp for a lot of people in Nashville. And I mean, if money and price is any comparison, I believe it's well over $1,000 per channel. You'd think like an expensive preamp is like $500 or maybe $800 per channel. But these Gordons are definitely more than that.
Well, the Neve is far more than that. And the Neve
That's true.
1073 is probably about, in Australian dollars, $2,000 a channel.
Yeah.
There's another way to go, too, with preamps. So if you want to get as much clean gain as you can, but with without any color, but do it really cheaply, there's also the cloud lifter. That gives you about 26 dB of gain just by inserting it into the line.
What you're saying is that a preamp running at a low volume, and it's true, it could have less character than a preamp running at like a higher gain stage, but that would basically imply some level of clipping or soft clipping in that preamp to give it that color.
Right.
But beyond that, I don't think you're escaping the sound of your preamp by getting a cloud lifter.
Yeah. No, you're true. It's true. It's the ultimate in simplicity in terms of a circuit.
Yeah. I would say that something like an AI1 can benefit from a cloud lifter because an AI1 has
45 maybe, I think.
Yeah.
dB of gain. Yeah.
It's not been a huge amount. I mean, it does seem to be enough for the task, which is this right here. But you're not going to record mouse farts with a AI1.
Yeah, because I remember when we did the that session from here with Somerset, we used the AI1 and we couldn't get enough.
Right, we were trying to push it. That's right.
Yeah. And then the one I'm using right now, in fact, is an NTG5 and the SSL2. Mm-hmm. And the reason I got the SSL2 was after our conversation, Robert, about getting an audio
push
interface.
That AI1. Yeah.
To get
and then you always have to wonder if you're pushing a particular preamp that loud, are you getting into its noisier section? Like nothing is designed to always run at full blast.
Yeah, we're just talking about character of these preamps right now. We're not talking about distortion. We're not talking about, self noise. How much noise is in the noise floor of each of them, That's another discussion really. But if I'm telling an actor what to buy, I always lean towards clean and undistorted. So because their job is to capture the audio as it is so that somebody else can make all those judgment calls. So rarely will I recommend to an actor to use something with a lot of color or character. That's just my philosophy.
I would completely agree. Like something that is also, it's easier to recreate or get a similar preamp if something happens. So a preamp that's trying to be less colorful is probably going to give you a more repeatable sound if you do have to be in a different situation. One thing I was going to ask is the UA system just comes right into this because here it is, like here's a clean preamp supposedly, and then you can throw these plugins on that emulate two aspects of it. They switch the impedance to match the way the preamp would load down the microphone, and then they also apply, whatever filter curves it is to emulate the preamp itself. And it's interesting. I mean, how many people are using those emulated preamps, or even something like I have a Manley Voxbox at home, but then when I'm on the road, I use the Manley Voxbox emulated preamp in the UA.
Yeah.
A lot of people buy that Voxbox plugin because it's sort of a legendary preamp, and I think they think it's going to just somehow make them sound better.
Magically.
Just by transitive properties, it's called the Manley Voxbox.
Yes.
Not
many females.
Should there be a company called Girly?
Yeah,
should there be like Girly or
Yeah, that's right.
But so consequently, I've dialed in a ton of the Voxbox plugins for people, and that thing has a lot of personalities because you can disable the transformer in it. So we were talking about the John Hardy that you could choose to have an input transformer or not. The Voxbox can do the same. You can disable it, and it does change its character quite a lot. So it's kind of hard to. It's not a one size fits all or one trick pony preamp. I think I've compared in a couple of studios the Avalon 737 to the Grace. The reason being, I just got tired of replacing tubes, and the light bulb would burn out. They just they take more maintenance, and so eventually I convinced a few clients to get the M103. That's the channel strip they make, the Grace M103. So it's got a compressor and an EQ. And we swapped those things in, and not a single studio that they worked with, like nobody noticed we changed it.
Wow,
so that just told me that the Avalon is certainly very transparent, right? It doesn't have much of a sound to it. It's people buy those often because they look cool or they got tubes in them, so they must sound cool. And my experience is they just are super clean. They just don't import distortion. They don't have transformers in the circuit. They're Class A and they're just clean. So just because a preamp has tubes and just because it's expensive or boutique doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have character either. You have to understand what they're for and why they were designed that way.
Yeah. I mean, Andrew, I'll tell you a preamp I'd love to check out, which I think now is possibly in the wheelhouse maybe, because RØDE bought Aphex, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And Aphex made a 2-channel, like, kick-ass preamp, actually. I think it was a 2-channel preamp. I'm trying to remember the exact model that it was. But I think it had some remote control aspects to it. Because I've got the Aphex 1788, which is like an 8-channel preamp.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a 2-channel that was very fast. And I think it was tube-based. And
what does that mean when you say it's fast?
It's able to, if you think about a waveform for the speaker to move or for air to move from one pressure to the other, it usually has to ramp up, and it takes a little bit of time for that to ramp up. And the quicker that preamp can match that same ramp up time that happens acoustically, then it's a fast preamp. It can react quickly. It can go from 0 voltage to whatever it is. The output needs to be 10 volts or something, or I'm not sure how much. So it can be quick. Now, the good thing about being quick is it's more accurate to what's happening in the real world. Usually if things are too quick, they sound brittle, they sound too clinical. Certainly if something is not quick enough, it can't do high frequencies as well, but it has a lot to do with just the transients. I think they call it the slew rate is the exact technical term when you're talking about a fast preamp. It has a very low slew rate. Slew means like the amount of time it can ramp up its voltage.
I see. Is this preamp maybe the 207D?
I don't think it's that one.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know
That
they
one
also
came out
made.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is this one based on their tube essence? I'm a tube, but I'm not a tube.
Maybe it's from 2008, so it's not vintage.
Yeah,
But it's not new either.
Because Aphex had their tube essence technology, which was basically tube sound without a tube. So, which is, I believe it's that tubes distort at the second harmonic.
No, this was a hybrid.
Instead of the third harmonic.
It says it's a hybrid. It had a solid state front end and then a tube output stage.
Tube
something
output
like
stage.
That. It says the solid state circuit provides low noise with good transient response, while the tube provides the flavoring.
It's not the one that I'm thinking of. It's
Yeah. They're calling it tube essence. That's what it says.
It's tube essence. But they're saying this is with a real tube for the output.
That's what it says, yeah. I've heard some interesting things about tubes, like that tubes can only really impart a tone when they're driven to distortion.
Yeah,
That's my understanding.
Tubes done properly are accurate, and in some ways possibly more accurate than a
The Avalon 737 is a super clinically accurate preamp.
It's just a way of amplifying gain. It's not like a tube is inherently
right.
It's interesting. All these vintage tube preamps, it's a lot to do with transformers and design and a lot of other things, not just
other stuff.
The fact that it uses a tube.
Yeah, I think it's a misnomer a lot of times that a tube preamp is going to mean it has a fatness, a warmth or a flavor. It's just not really true.
Well, I think we demonstrated that with the two that we use. We used the LA610, which is the tube-based preamp,
right,
and the Neve 1073, which is transformer, and the darkest one was the Neve.
Right.
In fact, the LA610 sounded pretty clean to me. It was I was quite surprised how good it sounded.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can I play you something that interested me, and then I've got a question for you, George. Let me play you. So I'll play you the
question for you, George. You better.
Well, I think George is probably the most equipped to ask it. But let me play you this. This is the OC18 through the Neve, and then the 41.6 through the Neve.
Okay.
So the Neve stays constant and the mic changes.
Right.
Yeah. With the same microphone, this is the Neve 1073 DPA. This is the 41.6, also going through the Neve 1073.
So then, let me throw you this. This is the OC18 through the Grace.
And this preamp is the Grace Design M101.
So I'm not sure whether they were too far apart for you to pick it up, but they're remarkably close.
The Grace and the 416 through the Neve.
Yeah. So the OC18 through the Grace and the 416 through the Neve, yes.
So the point is how they complement each other.
Yeah. So my question for you is matching amps to microphones. Clearly, it can be a bit of an art because we all know firstly that you wouldn't match a valve with a valve, right? You wouldn't put a valve mic through a valve preamp. Well, I wouldn't anyway.
Why not?
I don't know. For me, it would be it would get too murky.
I had a great preamp or channel, and it was, I mean, how about this? It was a Sound Deluxe U99 tube amp or tube mic going into a DW Fern tube preamp, going into a Summit hybrid tube / solid state compressor. Mm-hmm. And
ooh, wow. Fancy.
Wow.
That was nice. Yeah.
I have an affinity for Doug Fern because his factory, quote unquote, his barn, where he hand built those things was like 10 minutes from where I grew up. So
oh really?
I used to see him at like AES, and he'd be sitting there in front of his preamp and just sitting there with his big white beard and answering your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. If you've got the rack space and maybe the dollars to spare, that's a freaking crazy great preamp.
It's purist in terms of its they call it a point-to-point circuit.
Yeah.
So there's no PCBs, there's no circuit boards. Every component is just a wire from one to the next, right? So it's extremely purist.
It's also like $4,000 for,
right.
I think, a mono channel practically.
It might be,
It's up there.
So, preamps are a lot. There's a lot of voodoo in it, a little bit of mystery. Some of it is.
I'd like to point something out really quick, though. Sorry, before you close it up.
Yeah.
The difference in sound between the microphone, if you look at the 416 and the OC18 going into that Neve 1073, and you look at that difference compared to the OC18 and the Neve 1073 and the OC18 into the, say, the Grace, the microphone still makes a bigger difference than the preamp itself.
I agree.
Yes.
But I think the interesting thing for me is how much the pre can actually color that, though. Like it
really can.
If you're standing in your music store and you're lucky enough to have a music store that lets you sample the microphones, and you're listening to any mic, you're listening to a mic and you think, shit, I really like the sound of that. But then you take it home and you plug it into your pre, and all of a sudden you're going, hang on, that's not what I was hearing in the music store. What's going on?
You should have brought your pre to the music store.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? And this was my question for George, was how do you know if you're setting up a studio, how do you figure out what's going to work? Is there a way, or is that just an experience thing?
There's so much that we do that is just based on practicality. But I have had a client where he wanted everything to be at his fingertips. And so we combined a few different boxes to make the ultimate switcher setup. So he had an SM7B. He had a Sennheiser 416. The preamps, I'm trying to remember what was what, but I think he had a preamp that I installed called a Vorsys M1. It's made by Wheatstone, which is like a broadcast company. And then I think he also had a 737, and there might have been a third preamp. Okay, so he had 2 mics, 3 preamps. He didn't want to have to marry himself to one or the other. So I'm not answering your question very well, but I'm going to tell you what we did. We actually combined 2 switchers. One's called a gold digger and one's called a cherry picker. They're made by Radial Engineering.
Any input, any output.
Right. So we had any mic going to any pre. And so the gold digger is a mic switcher and the cherry picker is a preamp switcher. So we had the output of the gold digger going to the input of the cherry picker. Oh, and then he could choose any combination of anything. Long story short, I believe he never touched anything. He never actually.
He was probably too afraid to.
He had it all, but he was like, I don't know what to do with it all.
Yeah.
I was like, well, that's what you wanted.
Information overload.
These switchers allow you that flexibility. Let's say if you really are just like, the mic for me is a 41.6, right? But you do have like a Neve and you have a Grace, right? And you want something that contrasts. Something like the cherry picker would let you switch seamlessly between those 2 preamps and get those two colors at the press of a button. So do I do that often? No, especially since the Apollo stuff came out. Now you can just mix and match stuff so quickly and readily that it's just changed the game entirely.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I'm not much of a gear nut when it comes to boutique pre's. I would say Robert for sure would be more so, and most studio engineers tend to be more interested in varieties of color because their job is to bring anybody in and get the best sound out of that actor and that performer possible. And my job is just to capture the actor cleanly, accurately, and reliably, and that's it, mostly. So I rarely ever lean on anything with color. It's just about clean and low noise. You know what I mean?
I kind of agree. So for me, what it is, if it's music, yes, you can definitely go for color and try to find something that works magically. And there are some definite magic combinations and things that are just like, wow. But you have to sit there and mess around and spend time to find it. And then the other approach is just more in post-production where you want to get something that's repeatable, that gives you everything, that someone can basically in post-production kind of get closer to whatever sound it is that you need. Because very often in post-production, the sound changes are more broad strokes. So you're going to record someone, but you're going to end up making them sound like they're in a phone. It doesn't matter what preamp you use at that point, because I'm just going to filter the hell out of it anyways and make it sound like it's coming through a crappy old phone. And so what you need more in post-production is a range of options and one that doesn't limit you from any of them. You can always color it more easily than you can uncolor it, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like, don't compress, don't EQ, don't filter, don't gate, don't do any of it. Just let it all happen later, because it can all happen later anyways.
Yeah. The EQ is not so hard to correct if it's not quite right. If it's really way out of whack, obviously it's not good. Compression is really hard to correct. I mean, if it's bad compression, it's terrible. If the mic is lumpy and has a bad response curve, that's hard to EQ. The less you have lumps and bumps in the response, the much easier it will be for your engineer, producer to shape it, to sculpt it.
I mean, less is more, and I think for that reason, it's like I think it's better to have. I mean, Andrew, you do find that some of your customers are asking for, I want this preamp, or I want that preamp, or I want this mic, or I want that mic. So they are aware of the differences.
They're aware of it. They hear it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was talking to George before we got on air for this, but the client I have in Dubai, AJ, who's the engineer there, I've offered him different combinations of preamps and mics and whatever. He's very happy, and in fact, his favourite one is the OC818 and the Neve 1073. And that, to me, is kind of weird for radio imaging because, as Robbo knows, like most people with radio imaging, they want super cut-through, like a 416 and something. But he's really happy with that. So I gather he's set up a template, he just plops it in, bang, and out it goes. And he's got enough information from that file that he can pretty well do whatever he wants to do with it.
Oh, God, yeah. The OC818 will give you all the information, right? I mean, it's really accurate, not hyped, not bright, not sibilant, not harsh. It's just a real nice sounding mic. I'm not going to call it flat. It's not technically flat, but and then running it through 1073, it just has just enough of that something that he likes, and so it works for him. So it's at the end of the day, when you get to a point in your career where you're at, you start to look for ways to provide a service somebody else can't.
Yeah, true.
Most other voice actors can't do that. They either don't know how to, could care less, can't afford to, or whatever. They just don't have that the gear or they don't care. It's like on to the next.
It's definitely in the minutia. I mean, I would argue I'd argue that Andrew would still have the gig if he only had his Grace and his 416.
Yeah.
But there's something about that Andrew is putting that little bit of extra. Mm-hmm. As Frank Zappa put it, he puts the eyebrows on it.
All right.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this guy, I like that. He cares, and he's got a couple chains, and he gave us some options. So, you never know what it is that keeps you a repeat client coming back. But that could be that thing for some clients, I mean, your voice and your talent gets you in the door, but your level of production value, quality, consistency is what keeps them coming back over and over and over and over and over.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, do you have a favorite on your setup? Because I liked your Gefell mic. I thought that was a great sound.
Yeah, that was the tube Gefell, wasn't it? That was the MT, the M92.1.
92.1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing sounded great.
Yeah, that's a great mic. It is a really good mic. It's actually very noisy. Not that that's a major issue, because I'm sure no one's going to hear it particularly anyway. Only the most fastidious of engineers are going to pick up on that. But no, I must admit, since we've been playing with the OCs, the 18 and the 818, I'm pretty well. That's it for me. I've hit that, and I'm really happy.
Do you know how many times I've heard you say that? That's it for me. And then like a month later, it's like, oh, I just got sent this microphone.
Just guess what I just got sent. This is very true. Yeah, there is a personality flaw involved in any comment I make. Sorry about that.
Just a little bit more marketing.
Yeah.
Child in the candy shop. Yeah.
But it's funny because I took out the shotguns out the booth, and I used the M101 and the 18, and that's my sort of like cut through one.
That's the setup.
That's your happy place.
I'll be honest, when you switched over to that 416, it's like Andrew's jumping out of the speakers more. That 416 has that reach, and I know it has a little bit of a snarly edge compared.
It's funny, isn't it? I think it's just the sound that we're all used to. I think that's the biggest thing.
Pops out.
I was just having that conversation with somebody. Yeah, it's why on This Week in Radio Tech, I just got to be on this really great, show that's been like 12 years running or something, and we talked about that mic, and I said, I think it's the mic because it's momentum. It's been in the production chain of voiceover since the 70s, and at least in Hollywood. Yeah. And so it's been heard just millions of times. And I think it just imprints itself on your brain. It's just become a familiar sound, and everything inherently, we're not even doing conscientiously, but we're comparing it to that.
It's the benchmark. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a benchmark.
Well, Benchmark's a different company.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
So, Robert, you actually preferred the sound of the 416 through the 1073, or 416, I should say.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That notice the difference that the microphones themselves have. It's a much bigger impression difference than the preamps, and I do think that the 416, while I know it's not accurate, it has a certain bigger than life, jumps out kind of aspect to it that I don't know if you guys heard it too, but to me, the 416 was just like, had more of a, like, for lack of a better word, like bam, there it was, like in your face. The OC18 was more mild mannered, probably would have hyped it up or something and brightened it up and made it do something that maybe the 416, I probably wouldn't have EQ'd it as much as I would have the OC818, I think. Just imagining that voice like in a spot or in, what I do a lot.
Yeah. Oh, well. Back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Damn it.
Well, that was fun. Is it over?
The Pro Audio Suite recorded using RØDE NTG5s and Source Connect. Edited by Andrew Peters and mixed by Voodoo Radio Imaging with tech support from George the Tech Witter. Help us share the show with more people and get your hands on exclusive content by contributing to our Patreon page. See patreon.com/Pro Audio Suite. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and join in the conversation on our Facebook group. To leave a comment, suggest a topic, or just say g'day, drop us a note at our website, theproaudiosuite.com.